Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Julia is my co-pilot, and we will be discussing an article in the Chronicle of Education entitled A Profession on the Edge: Why Admission Officers Are Wearing Down, Burning Out, and Leaving a Profession They Once Loved. We've never addressed this topic before. It's an article by Eric Hoover. Our SpeakPipe question comes from an American living abroad, Ali in Europe. And she wants to know, how can you avoid being unduly influenced by an older sibling's positive experience at a university, and now your second child is seeing everything through the prism of the other university? How can you avoid that? Is that good? Is that bad? So Lisa and I will talk about that. Brand new interview, but not a brand new person. Gus Resendiz. Remember Gus? He did an interview about avoiding the potholes in athletic recruiting about 6 months ago, and we got tremendous feedback on that. Well, Gus is back. He has a great perspective on the pros and cons of attending a co-op centered university, having done that himself. And so we do a deep dive into this. It'll be a 3-parter that will air 3 Thursdays in a row. And our spotlight will be part 2 of Sylvia Borgo doing a deep dive into the Semester at Sea Study Abroad program. I'm here with Julia. I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
I'm kind of excited about what we're going to talk about today. But before I shouldn't be excited. It's kind of a depressing topic, but excited to inform people of some of the realities out there. But before we get into our hot topic of the day, let's kick it off with some of our normal stuff. So the admissions tip. You've got one for us on fares.
Sure.
Take it away.
It is the season of spring travel. There is no rest for admission officers. They have just gotten in their deposits from seniors, and they are on to you, juniors. They are ready for you, and they've got all the time now for you. So many admission offices are out on the road for what they call spring travel. And oftentimes this travel is a lot more general. And so a lot of the time it's maybe large college fairs, or maybe they're doing a special sort of program at a hotel or school nearby with some other colleges. But these folks know that you are still a junior in high school and likely at the very beginning of your college search. So we just had a massive college fair that my school and other Boston area independent schools put on. And right away, panic set in with my students. They're like, "Oh, Ms. Esquivel, what am I supposed to say? What do I say to the rep at the table? What do I do? How do I act?" Don't worry. They don't expect you to be experts right away. So for some of my maybe less vocal, more shy students, I always say admission officers are going to lose their voice. They're going to answer the same question over and over. So there is nothing wrong in huddling up with someone who might have just asked a question and answering or listening to the answer that the rep is giving. Oftentimes, students ask really general questions. So whatever that student in front of you might have asked might pertain to something you're interested in. I always ask my students to also not ask too obvious questions, and sort of go down the line and ask the same question of every school. Oh, do you have hair care? Oh, do you have criminal justice? Oh, do you have, guess what? You could probably spend a little time on your phone and just Google that real quick before you talk to the admission officer. So please try to have something a little more thoughtful in mind.
Let me ask you something, Julia. What made someone stand out to you at a fair when you were at admissions?
I really actually like students that ask quality of life questions. So the students that know that they're going to be able to read about a major online, they're going to be able to find out what the student faculty ratio is online, but maybe was more curious about these factors that you wouldn't know about a college unless you maybe were there. So sometimes I had students ask me, what's the buzz on campus? What are all the students talking about right now? What are the students' biggest complaints about the school? What are the students' favorite aspects about the school? Actually, some students would ask me where they could access the student publications from the college I worked at, which I think is a great way to sort of understand what students are saying, what's going on campus, what they care about. So I really like those quality of life questions. Every now and then, if you're a funny person or you'd like to do a little repartee back and forth, that can work. But if you're not a comedian, don't try that, because sometimes I can be really tired as an admission officer on the road, and I'm not, I don't want to sell my school to you, quote, quote. But I think students who are just themselves, and actually students that I felt very trusting of a student that really just came up with really sort of innocent, authentic questions, not trying to get something out of me in a transactional way, because I'm often the person reading your application if I'm the admission officer standing at that table at that regional college fair. But really the student who is just curious about college in general and how my college fit or didn't fit that student. So I am more likely to give an honest answer to students if they give me an honest question, if that makes sense. So every college is not for everyone, right? So at first I used to think like, oh, I have to find a way to say that we offer cosmetology, right? But we don't. And so it was just like, oh, actually, we don't have that program, but I could think of about 3 other schools in the vicinity that could. And I actually really liked those conversations with students who had a really clear sense of what they liked. And then together we could have a conversation about whether that made sense at my school or not. So you don't have to have the most detailed questions, but maybe come up with some just preliminary research, but ask me things that you might not, or ask the admission officer things that you might not be able to glean unless you were maybe sitting on that campus and talking to students in the dining hall or whatnot, rather than some easily answered questions online. Definitely get the pulse from the admission officer. If they're an alum, you can always ask that, like, did you go to this school? And oftentimes if this person didn't go there, they'd be happy to tell you about their college as well. So I always think just authentic engagement, just be yourself. It is, even if you're nervous and you fumble and you do something wrong, no one's going to hold that against you. You get points for just talking to someone. So I always say just be yourself, but go in with some real concerns or questions you might have about the life at that college, and don't be afraid to ask those questions. So they're trying to sell themselves to you right now. So you can really try to be a very discerning consumer at this point.
I agree with you. To me, it was always great questions that always made somebody pop, and different questions. And I don't know how you felt, but I didn't mind the personal questions to me. Now, you don't say, what was your college GPA or something like that, but but something like, why have you chosen to stay here? Like,
Yeah.
I think questions like, or why did you choose to work here? Like,
Right.
I think questions like that are great as well. But keep in mind, great questions will totally, totally, totally make you pop. So our admissions vernacular is the word TA, and some schools use that, not just for the, teaching assistant, but tentative admit. kind of like the low admit. You know how you're going through and you're rating somebody and you're on the fence, and you can label them. Okay, I'll push for admit. Some schools use low admit, some schools use tentative admit. Zillions of other slang terms out there, but TA, tentative admit, meaning I'm going to say admit for now, but in the shaping process, if this one gets pushed out, I'm not going to fight too hard.
Those were always the sad ones for me. That's where the tears came out in committee.
I know. We all get so attached. So rather than just jump right to the big number, I have to give a shout out, which I do every now and then. So many of you know that my daughter, Karis, my oldest daughter, graduated Davidson, and she was on the Great American Baking Show. She still is. It went live on the 5th of May on Roku, and really, really, really excited about that. But this shout out is not just to my daughter, who I'm excited for as well, but Davidson College. I have to give them a shout out. So she graduated from there. So Davidson follows her on Instagram and all her baking. And so the alumni chapter reached out, check this out, Julia, and threw like alumni watch parties all around the country for the show. Isn't that cool?
That is so cool.
And that only happens at like a community-based school, like to do something like that broad scale. And so shout out to Davidson College. I think that's pretty cool to throw community watch parties throughout the community. That's what happens when you live residentially and you bond and you form that bond. And Haverford was the same way, that kind of community. So shout out to Davidson. Okay, so our big number for today, and I like to do this when I can, is share a big number, which will also be a little bit of a segue into our article for the day, which is kind of sad, but we gotta keep it real with you guys. And the big number is 60. And what is 60 referring to? So this is a quote from an article that we'll be discussing in a second. And the article is called "A Profession on the Edge: Why Admission Leaders Are Wearing Down, Burning Out, and Leaving Jobs They Once Loved," by Eric Hoover in the Chronicle. And here's a quote from the article. It says, "During the first 2 years of the pandemic, the University of Denver had to replace nearly 60% of its admissions and financial aid staff, with some positions turning over more than once," says Todd Reinhardt, Vice Chancellor for Enrollment. "People were leaving it every time of the year," he says. It's really hard to train someone who comes in mid-year during the busiest part of the cycle." So the big number is 60. It's hard to run an office with the 60% turnover there, Julia. And so...
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
With that, I'll transition to the article. And I'm really curious what Julia has to say, because you still know a lot of people in the profession. And I know she's going to have a lot of insights. But as I said, the article is called "A Profession on the Edge: Why Admission Leaders Are Wearing Down, Burning Out, and Leaving Jobs They Once Loved," Eric Hoover in the Chronicle. And I'm going to do something I don't do that often, and I hope I don't bore you guys, but I want to read a nice chunk of this article because I really think that reading will help you to just get the gist of it. And then I'll discuss a few quotes, and then Julie and I will open it up for some conversation here. So it starts out and says this: "Each spring, the stress took its toll. One year, her blood pressure spiked. The next brought severe stomach problems. The following year, a panic attack sent her to the emergency room. After that, Karen Dahlstrom reached a conclusion: my body was revolting, and my job was the cause. That job consumed her. An executive director of admissions at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, Dahlstrom helped lead an annual campaign to enroll 700 freshmen and bring in enough revenue to keep the small Lutheran institution thriving. She loved working for her alma mater. where, as an undergraduate, she found several mentors who nurtured her leadership skills. Guiding an admissions staff gave her a feeling of purpose. And the sight of students striking the ceremonial gong each spring after deciding to enroll always flooded her with happiness. But the grueling months leading up to May 1st, the traditional deposit deadline at many selective schools, robbed her of sleep, energy, time with her family. Each spring, recruitment cycles overlapped. Her staffers would be hitting the road to meet high school juniors, even as they were fielding emails and calls for just admitted seniors. Meanwhile, families would be visiting Augustana with heads full of questions, and seemingly everyone who worked for the college would ask how next year's class was shaping up. Dahlstrom often woke up feeling as if something heavy were weighing her down. A self-described overachiever, she rationalized her anxiety. This is good stress, she told herself during 60-hour weeks, when work gnawed into nights and weekends. Still, her body kept telling her that something had to give. Her husband and her son, who often saw her coming home tired and distracted, taking work calls during dinner, kept telling her the same thing. Finally, in 2021, Dahlstrom resigned from her job. At 38, she had decided that an admissions career wasn't sustainable. I was afraid the stress was going to kill me. Similar stories are echoing throughout the hallways of higher education. Vice presidents of enrollment, as well as admissions deans and directors, are wearing down, burning out, leaving jobs they once loved. Though there's no way to compile a chart quantifying the churn, industry insiders describe it as significant. We're at an inflection point, says Rick Clark, executive director of undergraduate admission at Georgia Tech. There have always been people leaving the field, but not in the numbers we're seeing now. Some are being shoved out the door by presidents and boards. Some are resigning out of exhaustion, frustration, and disillusionment. Some who once sought top-level positions are rethinking their ambitions. The pressures have ratcheted up tenfold, says Angel Perez, chief executive of NACAC. I talk with someone each week who's either leaving the field or considering leaving. The field is losing top talent even as the stakes of enrollment work are getting higher. Blame the strain of recruiting incoming classes from the declining number of high school graduates, many with increasing financial need, the intensifying financial challenges at tuition-dependent private colleges and regional publics, the often unrealistic expectations of presidents and boards, the unquenchable thirst for prestige, the increasing turnover among admission staffers on the front lines of recruitment, the growing scrutiny from the courts, from legislators, from faculty, from hawk-eyed parents, the public's waning faith in the value of a degree, and the unrelenting pressure of it all. You can feel it. And then it goes on to say, this account is based on interviews with 23 current and former admission officers over a 4-year period, and it shares their stories. I'm going to read a couple more quotes, Julia, and then I want to hear your thoughts. So here's one. They agree the hottest seats on campus, along with those occupied by presidents and football coaches, are the admission officers, and they keep getting hotter. It's on fire, a former enrollment vice president says of the profession. She left after 25 years. My days are numbered. A mid-career admissions official at a highly selective university tells the Chronicle, losing the joy. One senior admission official who was among the field's most respected young leaders resigned midway through the current cycle. I hit a moment when I honestly feared for my health. I wondered if this job would take years off my life, or God, was I going to have a heart attack? Here's another quote. Just about anything a college cherishes or desires, just about anything it hopes to enhance or fix, relates directly to the work done by the people in charge of bringing in new students and tuition revenue. Institutions have heaped countless wants, needs, whims, and wishes on their shoulders. And Julie, I want to get to you, but can I read a couple more?
Of course.
Let me read a couple more, and then I want to hear what you have to say. Many enrollment officials describe presidents who daydream about their colleges doubling the number of full-pay students within 2 or 3 years of climbing into the U.S. News and World Report's top 50, as if it were simply a matter of will. Often, colleges believe they have a marketing problem, but they actually have a programming problem. Here's another one. Regional public universities and not so selective private colleges in, let's say, Michigan, aren't going to start pulling in hordes of students from California or Texas, or China for that matter. Every public can't expand its out-of-state recruitment. Every private can't become a national brand. A vice president for enrollment at a regional public university where headcount has been declining for more than a decade describes his job like this. There's so much that's out of my control. Traditionally, 2/3 of the institution's students enroll as transfers, many from a nearby community college, where enrollments have been tanking for the last few years. After taking the job not long ago, the official said he made the obvious move to attract more first-year students, purchasing more names of prospects, visiting more high schools, developing more relationships. But many factors are working against him. For one thing, the institution is now offering more than half its classes online. It's a dead campus. So I just want to stop because I'm tired of hearing my voice, but what are your thoughts?
Well, this article made the rounds in our world very much. And just thinking about how many colleges I talked to this admission cycle, I talked to one small liberal arts college who has a staff of 12, and 8 of those staff members left throughout the admission cycle, not at the end, not at the beginning. A lot of places that had interim deans, interim directors, interim VPs for enrollment. I can think of a lot of, and these are very selective and quote prestigious colleges. So these are not necessarily your small places that are just hoping that they'll keep up enrollment. This can really affect a lot of people. It is very true that a lot of the time admission officers are underpaid and underappreciated. The average person reading your application is probably under the age of 30 and has 8 minutes or less and might make $45,000 a year. I think it's important to realize there's humans behind this work. And I think almost all of us got into this for the human aspect of higher education. And that feels like that's so far from what we do now that I really understand. And I've heard more than ever so many people that have been in this profession for years say, I've had enough and leave. And they might have been paid well. They might have actually climbed the ranks as they wanted to, but there just wasn't passion or soul in it for them anymore. And so I lost at least 3 deans or VPs of enrollment just in our Boston area in the last admission cycle. Just wanted to do something totally different.
So let's look at the reasons for this, Julia. One of them is pay. There's no question about it. You mentioned 45,000, and you mentioned seeing the turnover at the most selective schools. Well, it's worse at the less selective schools in terms of pay. Yes. The article goes on to talk about some positions starting out as low as $31,000 a year, and one even $25,000. And so, in fact, let me read this one last thing because it talks about the frustration with the pay of the admission office versus the football. So It says, Peterson, a former admission director at UAB, recalls hiring an entry-level staffers at $31,000 a year, which didn't go very far, even in a city with low cost of living. Many of these staffers would wait tables and deliver groceries on the side. Admission officers are salespeople, he said, but they're not making sales money in higher ed. One enrollment president recalls trying to secure a $5,000 raise for each of 2 admission officers that were making $25,000 at a public university. The institution declined the approval of those raises and within days announced a multi-million-dollar contract extension for the football coach. So sometimes it's pay. Sometimes when you also say it's just long hours that burn you out.
Yep.
And then another thing I would say would be just unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
So what would you like to say about either of those, either the long hours or the unrealistic expectations?
There are quite a few introverts in this profession, but I will be honest with you, if you are an admission officer, especially if you are not the dean or director, you are likely on the road, maybe if you're lucky, 7 weeks or less. I used to be next to High Point University at college fairs, and the rep I had in the New York area did 17 weeks of travel every year. And when we say travel, that means you might be going from one end of the country to the next day. You might not even touch down for more than 18 hours. You're in a different car, driving to a different place you've never been, staying in a different hotel room. It's often weekend hours and night hours as well. And what admission officers are tasked with when they travel is recruitment numbers and recruitment deliverables. So if you are sick, gosh, I really hope you're not contagious because you're going to that high school visit. You can't rearrange that. This article makes a point about trying to increase diversity in all sorts of aspects, socioeconomic, racial diversity. So that means maybe if you're on the road that you need to go visit some other places, you might need to do an evening visit. You might need to do a reception on Saturday or Sunday. So it can be a lot. I loved it when I was in the profession, and I was a single woman without children, and I just had this job to attend to. And even then, there'd be periods of time in my cycle that I just wouldn't even talk to my parents, for example. So, and this was, I think, even far more manageable 10 years ago than it is now.
And I was really fortunate too, because I came from development. And so I came in at a different pay structure because and the article talks about how the development is, and the advancement, a lot of schools call it advancement, schools call it development, is fundraising, right? And so that pays better than admissions. And so I came in at a different pay structure. Otherwise, there's no way I could have done it. There's just no way. And I was just very fortunate that I was coming in at the development advancement pay rather than the admissions pay.
Sure.
And then the thing is, talented admissions people have real skill sets that can really make them marketable.
Yeah.
Like, you can go into college consulting and do really well. You can go into sales and for profit, and you have a skill set that can, translate into a six-figure income. I mean, so people have options like that, and more people are discovering. But so I think it's a combination of overworked, underpaid, underappreciated.
Yes.
Some ways it's the same thing teachers are going through: overworked, underpaid, underappreciated.
Absolutely. And somehow everything's not lining up, right? And there's not one person or one thing to blame, but it's not a cycle, right? We don't have the folks who are able to represent the college in a way to get those folks that you're hoping to get. It just all doesn't work together. And I do think it's important. I've known a lot of people who this is their life. And have started to just feel like the meanie as the admission officer. This article quotes one of my favorites, Daryl Jones, who
yes, that's great.
Always hated presenting with him because he'll steal the spotlight. But on top of that, I would always be at a more selective college, and he was still at a selective college, but it wasn't denying the vast majority of applicants. And he was like, I don't want a job where I'm doing that, where I'm always saying no to people. And I'm like, oh, you're right. That's terrible that I do that. And people don't like saying no and being highly rejective, but it can start to also take its toll on your values and what you thought the value of higher education was when you're having to make decisions that don't necessarily align with your values or even the college's values. You're now hitting different targets that you didn't think you signed up for. And there's sort of this disillusionment that I've heard a lot of people talk about being an admission officer, and maybe they switch sides of the desk because of that, become a counselor, or they've just left the profession in general feeling like it does not have that transformative power, or what they're getting back is not what they're putting in.
So let's talk about this from the standpoint, Julia, of a parent listening who's got a high school kid, and sure, they're maybe a little intellectually curious about what it's like in the profession, the challenges, but what should an applicant know? How does this impact an applicant? Can you think of that at all? I'm thinking of how this knowledge might inform things that an applicant might do that might be offensive or off-putting, or maybe the opposite, maybe sensitive and appealing. Are there any things that you think of that having this knowledge just might sensitize somebody to
what they either put in an application or don't put, or how they conduct themselves at a fair or a school visit or anything? Anything come to mind?
I would just say give everyone a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Admission officers do that for you. You might have a typo somewhere. You might have been off a little bit in an answer for an interview. Admission officers will be that way too. So they might make a faux pas during an information session, or they are not heartless people because they only spend 8 minutes on your application. And it's not personal. They're literally just hitting the milestones of their job. And you might want to think about too, like, do you want to go to a school that this is where they place their value? How happy are their representatives? Do their representatives have the time to care for you in the way you put into that application, right? I feel like that's almost so impossible. You've got these places driving up applications and not adding to their workforce. So I'm just not sure how that always works out. But that there are so many things out of your control as an applicant that might not have anything to do with your application, but more the resources and the vantage point of the person who's reading your application. And this is also why, please, friends, don't send so many extra supplemental materials, because even if it might feel like that's rounding out your story and it's not personal, and I hate that you would have to hold back something about yourself. A person might not have time to give all of that energy to you, to no fault of themselves, and so they're not gonna be like, oh, this is awesome, that student piled all this extra stuff on top of me, I'm so glad they did that, because I have all the time in the world to read it. So think about another reason to be mindful about how much extra material you might be sending, is that there might be someone who won't be able to appreciate that on the other side.
Those are all great points. And I'll throw in another one. Well, let's go back to why we do the job. We do it to like impact lives and make a difference, right? And that's where the joy comes, when we feel like we're making a difference. So one thing that a student can do that would really encourage an admission officer is, if you meet somebody and they're, for whatever reason, really impressive to you, maybe they were courteous or kind or helpful or knowledgeable or thoughtful, sending a note to the director of admission
Yes.
about how impressed you were with, the name of the rep, and like, there's a good chance that will come back and then the person will mention that to them. And that kind of thing is really encouraging. That can make your day, to have feedback that whatever, that information session you did, or that visit to that school, or that conversation at that fair, it got you excited about the school, and you just thought the person was so poised and professional or knowledgeable or kind or courteous, that kind of thing. And then sometimes it can even just be the little things, like an admission officer's coming with a bunch of bags, and and a student grabs them and helps them and walks them to their table, and would you like a bottle of water, or any of those little things. Or you could even give feedback directly to the person as well, like follow up afterward, and as long as it's genuine, right? As long as it's genuine. But those little things that let people know that they are making a difference, those are the things that keep people in the job, and that's what they need to weather and sustain all the other twaddle that's coming at you the rest of the time. So that's another thought that I have. Another thought that I have would be just not saying sort of really insensitive things about flaunting wealth because you might be talking about somebody who, we read extremes like delivering groceries and waiting tables, but even if it's not that's like, gee, I wish I could go out Friday night, but I gotta stay home and cook because I can't afford it, or my loans are so high, or whatever. And if people feel like they're flaunting their wealth or pushing things in your face, that could be a little off-putting as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to take this concept, distill it down to a level where an applicant can do something with it. Like, I think it's helpful to have knowledge, right? Like you said, like be patient with someone. They may be really stressed if they mess up at an info session. I know when Hillary was on, she talked about that. Like, like I trust you. I have your kids, best interest at heart. So be patient with me if I don't get something right. Like assume my intentions are the best.
Right.
So those are some of the thoughts that I have. Anything else you want to add, Julia? Or?
No, I just think that this is a really important thing because it does feel, if I were an applicant and I do watch my students go through this, it does feel like there's sort of this Oz, right? Reading your application, and it's probably an overworked, underappreciated, underpaid, lovely human who cares awfully much about, or awful lot about, the transformative power of higher education. So it is not all this doom and gloom, folks reading your applications just waiting to reject you. So most of the time, your admission officer is fighting for you. They are reading your application, prepared to bring you to committee and to fight for you. So the more you can kind of understand that someone's on your side, I think the more you can appreciate just sort of all the competing issues in admissions and why things happen the way they do when you can't really make sense of it.
Julie and I both know a decent number of admission officers who intentionally left more selective colleges to go to less selective colleges simply because they wanted to do more admitting and less denying.
And that reminded me of something else. And I can't say I've always 100% been consistent with this. Most of the time I am. We all had the experience in admissions, Julia, where somebody was really, really angry at us for not admitting somebody.
Yes.
And that could be anything from a parent to a school counselor. And only we know our applicant pool and we know the priorities of our institution. And I remember that happening to me a lot. And I remember saying to myself, like when I get to the other side, because I knew at some point I was going to flip to the counseling side, I said, I never, ever want to be that person that gets angry at somebody for not admitting somebody, because I know what that felt like. And I know what that felt like you don't know, like the applicant pool, or you don't know the priorities of the institution. And I think it's an important place for people to have grace, because it's really easy for darts to start coming for your head when people don't like the results, whether that's counselor or parent or student. And I think it's another thing is just a call for grace.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have your war stories.
I do.
We'll keep them offline. Well, thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Mark. This is important. I appreciate this.
Yeah, and hopefully I didn't bore people with the long reading. I won't do that very often, but I just felt like I didn't feel like I could summarize the article as well as like Eric Hoover did with just the stories he told. And so hopefully that, brought it home for some of what's happening out there in the profession. I want to say one more thing, Julia. I'm concerned about education right now in general.
Me
because
too.
I'm sure this is your experience. Let me just ask you, what percentage of your students tell you, I want to be an educator?
I had one this year, and that's my first time in 7 years of counseling adolescents.
See how rare it is? It's just,
Yep.
I was just thinking, like, of all the things we have people say they want to do, and we hear every imaginable profession, how rare is it? Now, I'll occasionally get a college professor, because that still has a little bit of stature to it. Like, I'll get, I'll get that maybe like twice a year. But someone say they want to do elementary or middle or high school?
Right.
I can't even remember the last time I had someone say that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of my favorite commercials, I don't know if you ever saw this, but, this is like little kid going on and on and on about how he wants to be a teacher. And like the mom says, like, have you ever thought about being a doctor? And then
Right.
the kid says, Mom, can I ask you a question? If we never had any teachers, where would the doctors come from?
Right.
And it's like really powerful, but it does sort of show just education in general right now.
Yes.
And I remember having a conversation before I left KIPP with a senior person about how high the turnover was. And I was like, well, why? And they're like, why? And they started going down all the reasons, like how hard the job is, the demands. And some of it also was there's not a lot of prestige in teaching elementary and middle and high. And so if you're getting overworked, underpaid, long hours, and you're not, and then, I've said this to some people, like, you're not supposed to go into it for prestige. Okay, I get it. Let's change that to another word, respect.
Right. Mm-hmm.
People don't feel respect. Nobody likes to not feel validated. And I'm just really concerned broadening this out from admissions just to education in general. And then throw on top of it school shootings? Like who signed up for that?
I know.
There's not enough money you can pay for that. So that's not even a financial thing. So hate to be kind of dour and end on that note, but I do think it's important to just say that.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
So, Lisa, I'm talking to you here from Winston-Salem, and we're supposed to be at High Point tomorrow to tour. So, hope you don't get sick of me. Podcast, seeing me at SACAC, touring with me.
I could never get sick of you, Mark.
That's a nice thing to say. So let's dive in. We have a question that in some ways is like tailor-made from you. And, it's a question about comparing Elon to other schools. And it's from, Allie. So listen to this question, listeners, and then I'll let Lisa comment, and then I'll chime in as well.
Hi, Mark. This is Allie, and I'm an American living abroad in Europe and a parent of 2 children. Your podcast really helped me navigate the admissions process for my daughter a few years ago. My daughter found that her best fit is Elon University, and she's having an extraordinary experience there as a sports management and marketing double major. We've learned so many amazing things about this incredible school, and we're thrilled by how happy, challenged, active, and motivated our daughter is there. Now it's my son's turn, and he's a different kid with different interests, like psychology and theater. But he sees his sister's experience as the role model. He knows a lot about Elon already. He's visited there and hung out with her friends, and he knows he can see himself there. And we think he's right. We can see him there as well, and his sister would be happy to have him on campus with her. My question for you is, how can a student and his parents avoid a bias for a sibling school when the sibling is thriving and the family also loves the school? How much influence should his sister's experience have over my son's own admissions journey?
Right. I really appreciated this question from Ali because I think, I have a daughter who goes to Elon. We love Elon a lot at our house. And, I definitely think that it would probably be put on the list of both of my younger children just automatically without even thinking about it. And I do think that, if your family is having a great experience and your son likes the school and is comfortable with the school and it's good for his academic area of interest and extracurriculars, it's definitely one to really consider. I think sometimes even with Elon, like it is a great place, but it's not the only amazing school out there. And so a lot of times teenagers want to close the deal because it's college decision is so anxiety provoking, right? It's all these unknowns. It's one of the first adult decisions that you really have to make. And so going where you already know, where your big sister is there, and frankly, she's had a great experience. I mean, I could see that being very appealing to a kid. But then on the other hand, you don't want to do what I call premature foreclosure of opportunities, right? So, even though that's comfortable, it might be that something that he does that's a little bit more anxiety provoking could actually be a better fit for him. And so I think it's just kind of, keeping in mind that you still have to look at other places and you have to try to have an open mind and you have to, I think, factor in that, just because a place is initially going to be less familiar and more uncomfortable. It might be a good fit, anyway, or even a better fit. So, I do think, Elon is one of those schools that fits a lot of people. And that is one of the reasons why it's so popular, because it has a lot of strengths and, all different kinds of academic subjects. It's got a lot of different extracurricular things going on. And it's a good size. So I can see why people are drawn to it. And I do think most families there have a good experience. At SACAC, I met one of my fellow North Carolina educational consultants, and she told me that she had 2 children. One went to Duke and one went to Elon, and they both went around the same time. And her family thought the Elon experience was much better, quite honestly. And, she says it's her favorite school. And so she's like me, she's putting on every single list that she does. So I feel the Elon love. I drink the Kool-Aid. I have a steady dose of it all the time. But that being said, we still have to encourage this young man to look at other places and try to have an open mind and not just let it, the familiarity and the anxiety of the situation push him in a direction that, ultimately might not be the best one.
Yeah. And just to follow up with what Lisa said, Lisa really drinks the Kool-Aid every list. I love Elon too, but there's some people that it will say it's too isolated, or it's too small, or it's too big, or that it isn't that racially or ethnically diverse enough, or it's not academically selective enough. There's this student I'm working with now who really had a disappointing experience in the state of Iowa. And he's looking for something more liberal. It's a transfer student I'm working with. And so, in searching with him, I said, well, how do you feel about purple states? And they said, which states? And I said, well, what about Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia? Absolutely not. So I still think there's some people that, that will find Elon too small, too big, too
of course.
rural,
it can't meet
whatever.
All the needs of all the people in the United States, right? Of course not.
Yeah. But it's a great school. Last night, Lisa and I are recording this on May 2nd, and yesterday was National Candidate Reply Day. And so I'm finding out some of my students to the last second. And so I said, I followed up with a New York student, and I just knew for sure she was going to say Elon. I was shocked. She said, the University of Florida at Gainesville. So I do get surprised. They do really, really well in their overlap. So, but let me go back specifically, because I know, Allie asked a lot as a parent too. How can you not sort of be preconditioned? So it's helpful in my experience for kids to have been on other campuses. It's extremely helpful because one of the things you're trying to do when you build a college list is figure out what are my must-haves versus my want-tos versus my deal breakers I can't deal with. And by exposure to a school you're really familiar with and you like, you can figure out what are some of those must-haves. But like you said, Lisa, as you get exposed to a lot more other schools, you start to realize just how much is out there. But nothing's wrong with saying we've already seen a model we like. He'd be happy there. His sister'd be okay with them being there. So the bar is at this level, and these are some of my must-haves that we don't want to compromise on. And I don't see anything wrong with that at all. But as you said, we've all seen kids who thought that school they visited first or second or third was the one. Well, case in point really is even this student I was just telling you about. Florida kind of came out of the blue. Florida we'd had a lot of conversations, a communication student. So, Elon's got a really strong communications program. So there was Elon was really in the mix with some New York schools, and out of the blue, that Florida visit blew them away. Had they not been open-minded to that, that might not have happened. So will you be somewhat predisposed? To some extent, yes, but that's not necessarily always bad, because what you're saying is I've learned some of the things that really matter in a college experience that I value, and I'm not willing to compromise those things. And I see that Elon has them. And so when it comes to certain areas, there are must-haves, and we're not willing to forego them. But being open-minded is important, and it is important. And I know Allie knows this. It's embedded in her question. Every kid is different. Every kid needs to have their own search, in my opinion. And sometimes the easy thing to do is to just think, well, it'd be great if they could be together. It'd be convenient. It'd be this, that, the other. And I'm not saying that Allie's doing that, but I think it's really important. It doesn't sound like that's an issue here per se, but I know a lot of times the younger kids can really sometimes feel conscious being in the shadow of an older sibling.
Right.
And
right.
I know my brother really felt that way about me. And to be honest, well, Norm's a pretty big voice. He was the quarterback of the football team and everything. But you know how I'll tell you how I relate to that, even that I'm the oldest. So my dad was vice principal of the school, and I was scheduled to go to the same high school that he was vice principal at. And just the year I was going into high school, he switched to another school, and I could not tell you how happy I was, because I did not want to be Alfred Stucker's son under his shadow. And this is something I'm really conscious of when I work with second kids, is how do you feel about that? Because sometimes I think, not always, but sometimes I think they can just flourish and thrive more if they're not under the shadow. Like they've always sort of been that bigger brother sibling or bigger sister sibling. And there's some ways that sometimes can be a crutch, or sometimes that can stifle them from just taking the initiative on their own and learning to explore on their own and just sort of even having their own identity. And I think those are all things that are really good to talk through and think through. It's not always the case. You can't just say one size fits all. It's always this way. But those are certainly conversations that are important and that people need to have and people need to think through, in my opinion. Any thoughts, Lisa?
Oh, yeah. And I just think that Elon has a lot of siblings. I mean, and I think they promote relationships with families. And, I don't know if it's still like this with the new admissions director, but they loved siblings before. So if you were a sibling of a student, you would get a call from like the admissions office saying you got in, like a personal phone call. I mean, they like kind of privileged that. So, and I know a lot of people who have multiple kids going there. So it seems like that's just one of the things that school does, is it really, wants your whole family to go there.
Sure.
Which I think, there's something nice about that. Like it's the school, everyone's connected to it. You have some of the same experiences. You can go to the football games and you don't have to root for two teams or whatever. That's really nice. But, you also have to consider, like what you said, the person's development. Is it individual, and is that going to be best served by going there?
Yeah, and so I think what Allie's doing is great, which is not ruling out Elon, keeping open-minded, but not being entrenched and locked in and saying this is where we need to go. Her question is, how can we prevent it from creating an undue bias so that you're looking exactly for everything like it? And, I think just more exposure to different schools is a really good sort of anecdote to that. Because you begin to see different strengths that other schools have and appreciating them for who they are, rather than just looking at everything through Elon prism glasses. And with exposure to more schools, it will just become evident over time. That's the single biggest thing that I would say, is exposure with an open mind. But I think the perspective Allie's bringing is the right perspective, which is we're not ruling it out just because the sibling's there. We see some things we really like a lot that we would like in our son's experience that we would not like to compromise on. All those things I think are good things. So I feel really confident you'll make a good decision. Any final word?
No, I just wish this family the best of luck.
Awesome. Best of luck. Follow up with us. Let us know what you decide.
I know. Go Phoenix.
I'm going to start thinking you're on the payroll. Evan Mandry's been replaced by Elon.
No. I love them both,
Yeah, it's all good. It's great when I have to, it's funny you say that, because I try not to, I feel like sometimes I'm really biased toward things as well, like particularly like Davidson. It's a really special place. But we all see life through our own world of experiences.
Yeah.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we have a brand new interview, but not a brand new person. Gus Resendiz is back. We got great feedback from his interview he did on pros and cons and pitfalls to watch out for in athletic recruiting. And now we're talking about pros and cons of a co-op education. So in part one, Gus shares the various co-op jobs he had while he was a student at Northeastern. Gus also shares how he ended up getting a co-op opportunity in the East Wing of the White House. Gus shares how his undergrad co-op inspired him to craft his own co-op in law school. And Gus explains how co-op taught him what he didn't want to do for the rest of his life. And finally, I introduced some criticisms I hear about co-op, and Gus comments on them. Listen and enjoy. Friends, Gus is back. Hopefully you enjoyed our four-parter we did on athletics. But now we got a completely different topic, and it's another one I feel he can really speak powerfully to our audience, and it's about co-op. And so I want to start by having you talk about your Northeastern experience and different co-op opportunities that you had, and let's just kind of take it from there, Gus.
Great, Mark. Thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about athletics with you. Just to revisit kind of my background a little bit, blue collar kid, growing up, not a lot of exposure to kind of the professional, work environments and first generation college, college attendee, college grad. And, for me, going into college, I had two items that, two concerns or two priorities, which were how am I going to pay for this and how am I going to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life? And what does this all mean? I really didn't have a good sense of any of that, except that I thought, geez, this sounds like a great opportunity to go to Northeastern and start working in jobs related to my major right out of the chute so that I can really come to understand what this is supposed to look like on the backside of graduation, on the other side of graduation. And so, Northeastern is a little bit different today than it was back then. Back then, it was a 5-year co-op program, and they had a middler year in between your sophomore and junior year. And so you went to school for 5 years. The first year was 3 quarters. And then starting with your sophomore year, you were either on a 3-month or 6-month or a 1 quarter or 2 quarter co-op rotation and then back in school. And because you were spending as much as half of the year away working in a job where, it wasn't an externship where you were paying tuition, you were out there at a job related to your major, making a few dollars, hopefully, minimizing some of the debt that you were undertaking. So for me, I went through that process. I was a political science major. I had this vague notion that I wanted to go to law school, even though I didn't really know what that meant. And so my sophomore year, I went to work at a big law firm in downtown Boston and ended up, being there for 3 months and ended up going back there. No surprise, they paid better than some of the public sector jobs. And I needed to pay for college. So I happily went back a couple times. And I actually met my wife there who had just graduated.
Oh, wow. You got a lot of perks out of this. So what would you say you learned there?
So, the first time around, I learned how to tie a tie. I learned how an office environment like that works. And we're talking about like one of the, top 50 law firms in the country. It was a very buttoned up environment. I learned how to dress the right way. I learned how to assimilate. Kids might call it code switch at some point. Sure. Here, as a Dominican Mexican kid coming up, there, from a blue collar family, there was a lot to understand about this mysterious kind of professional work environment. And, so it was a lot of soft stuff, right? Yeah. I was shelving books in the legal library, right? And so it wasn't a lot of heady stuff. the second time around when I went there, I was, being sent out to the specialty libraries around the city of Boston at all the universities to pull research on certain things for their cases and kind of learn to really navigate just about any library. Not a particularly useful tool today, right? In some respects. But at the time it was more of a cultural kind of, education, around that one. I also spent some time working in some government opportunities. I worked for a city councilman in Boston, and I worked for the General Services Administration, which is basically the procurement office for the federal government. I worked for the U.S. Department of Labor and their Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs.
Wow.
And that division ensured that folks that were contracting with the federal government were complying with a number of regulatory requirements. And, picked up a lot of different things, learned how to carry myself in an office, learned, substantively some things around how the world works, generally.
Do you think those experiences helped confirm or point you on the path to law school at all? Or do you think they were, unrelated?
I did. Yeah. Kind of collectively. I think all of those experiences really did reinforce that I wanted to go into practice. And again, I would say, for those parents out there and for those kids that are thinking about law school for their students, you never really know until you get into it what it is to practicing law. And I think it's historically one of those careers where folks have a relatively low job satisfaction. I think generally. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that, folks have a very different sense of what the job is going to be, right?
They're thinking Perry Mason, Law and Order, that kind of image in their mind of being a lawyer.
Right.
Instead of a lot of writing and pushing paper and doing a lot of writing.
Yeah. Well, so, even if your dream job is to save the world in some way, right? And you're going to use your law degree to do that, and you've got a case, that you're working through, so let's talk about, the U.S. Supreme Court just heard oral arguments on the affirmative action point, right? Irrespective of where you sit on one point or another on that issue, the lawyers on either side of that feel like they, charitably here, I'll characterize it as they may feel like they're doing a civic good here, right? Advancing their political issue. And the amount of due diligence, the amount of discovery that is, the amount of admissions records and just contracts, agreements, it's warehouses full of stuff that people are reviewing. And only a certain number of folks are actually going to end up in the courtroom litigating that case.
Right.
Right. And so you've got an army, a platoon of lawyers that will never see the outside of a warehouse, right, as they review those documents. But,
and people just need to know that you might end up doing a tremendous amount of document review and preparing briefs or whatever.
So, I got the sense of that working in the library at the big law firm, early on, what the curve was for being a lawyer. And, frankly, there were a lot of young lawyers there that said, don't go to law school, Gus. It's not, there's better ways to live your life. And I thought, oh, well, I'm pretty smart. I'm really hardworking. Like, it's going to be fine for me. Maybe they chose.
I'm the exception. Maybe you're the law school loser, and that's not me.
That's right. That's right. It's kind of like a parent that's like, well, my kid's definitely going to be D1 even though they're not to, right?
Sure.
But look, super competitive environment in its own right in law school and all that stuff. Maybe we can talk about that someday. But, but with respect to co-op, I had all these, great experiences. Actually, my last co-op was a job, in the White House in the Office of Legislative Affairs. And I worked in the East Wing. And that was an amazing experience to just.
So how'd you get that? Not everybody ends up getting a co-op job in the White House. So how'd you get that opportunity there, Gus?
Well, when we talked about recruiting, we talked about building relationships, right? And that goes for all of your, for the audience, for all of your kids, they should be really working hard to build relationships with their teachers, with their professors, with, faculty advisors that are more than just going to class and maybe getting a good grade in the class, right? Like there are some people that you're really going to want to connect with. Go to office hours to talk to them about their experiences or to talk about what you want your college experience to be. And one of the professors that I had at Northeastern was a name, people will recall was Governor Michael Dukakis.
Sure.
And he ironically
former presidential
taught a class.
candidate.
Yeah. Ironically taught a class on the American presidency.
How cool is that?
And so I had a class or two with him, but I was able to generate a good relationship with him. And so part of our co-op.
And he had some connections in the White House for you. Is that always a good lesson on networking, though, isn't it?
Right. And so, it was a co-op opportunity that was available for people to apply to. But once you got accepted into the program, there was a whole nother vetting process for kind of where you ended up.
Sure.
And so I think having those relationships was beneficial. If you've never, if you're not kind of aware of the structure of the White House, there's the old executive office building, which is this enormous building right next door to the White House. And that's basically where 90% of the offices are. So having a chance to actually be in the White House building itself, in the East Wing, was a pretty amazing experience for some, poor Latino kid who was just trying to figure out the world.
And what are you at this point, like 22?
Yeah, 21, 22. Yeah. They had some folks that had moved on to what was next in life for them. They asked me to stay on after my co-op was done.
So what would that have been like? Like that would mean, were they offering you actually a job? Like a job after you graduated from Northeastern to stay there?
Well, they said just stay. At the time, I had one semester left. They're like, you can just take the classes at GW and be done.
Wow.
Take them and then just stay. You'll start full time now.
And what would you have been doing?
So at the time, we were basically the lobby arm to the House of Representatives, and that was the Newt Gingrich Congress, the contract with America.
Yeah, you're bringing back memories.
104. Yeah. And so it was a pretty intense time. It was a Clinton administration. There was a lot happening in the office. It was a really exciting environment. And so kind of the opportunity that could materialize was you go work full time there for a while, and then, pivot to run some type of, silo in the election and the reelection process. And then from there, go to law school.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
So friends, I'm going to do something for the very first time. Our recommended resource is actually the same as our interview. It's just some college videos. So Sylvia was kind enough to follow up and send me some outstanding videos. You just go to thecollegetour.com and they have a series of videos on Semester at Sea. But the easiest thing is just going to be to go to our show notes, because we'll put the link in the show notes, and there's 10 videos on the Semester at Sea program. So there's one called Tour Living and Learning on Land, Tour a Floating College, Making an Impact in My Country and World. Then there's one on funding, preparing for your global future, the Semester at Sea secret sauce, the shared experience of a lifetime. There's one called Preparing for My Global Future. There's another called Finding My People and Place. And so there's a series of these videos. They're actually all on YouTube, but the link here has them all in one place, and it's our recommended resource for episode 327. I'll now return to Sylvia talking more to us about Semester at Sea. I'm always saying to people, Gus, college admission, especially holistic, schools that do holistic are always looking for people that are interesting and unique. Yeah. I would think that you've been able to parlay that experience into some good conversations, either in interviews or at least it's an interesting conversation starter. Has that served you well, getting that opportunity from a career perspective? I mean, not everybody gets an opportunity in the East Wing of the White House at 21 and 22.
It absolutely helped with college, with law school admissions. I think
Talk about that.
You have to. Law school admissions is, it's like college admissions on steroids, right? And except the holistic stuff is a little bit less so, unless you can bring something really unique.
Yeah, because a lot of times the LSAT score is a pretty big factor for a lot of schools.
The LSAT score, your GPA is so much of the process, right? It probably twice as important as it is for undergrad.
Yeah.
And, while a lot of people may take some time after college to go to work, I already had that time through the co-op. And so I could show I'm coming straight through, but I worked for a Boston City councilman and we worked on this. I've worked in the, federal contract compliance program. I've worked on this. And, by the way, I was at the White House, or I'm going to, by the time I applied, I was doing that the winter quarter of my senior year. So when I applied, I said, and I will be spending the winter quarter at the White House.
How cool is that?
And so that definitely got people's attention, right? And
I would think it would.
In some of my acceptance letters, people referenced, kind of the co-op experience and the differentiator that was. And so I was very grateful to have that. And it served me very well in the process. And it served me well to give me perspective around what the world was and how I wanted to fit into it.
Nice.
And so, I can't say enough about the co-op program generally. At Northeastern today, it's a little bit different. They have a 4-year program now, and you have to kind of, it's not as extensive as it once was.
I mean, they still have that 5-year option, but I guess they have you a 4 and a 5-year option.
Oh, do they? Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They have a 4 and a 5-year option. Yeah.
So, I'm, in some ways, it's like, what's the rush, right? Like, go take this thing, go do the 5-year.
That's what I tell people. Go get your 18 months worth of co-op experience, do the 5-year, and come out with work experience. You're more marketable. You also should have a better understanding of yourself.
Yeah.
What's the rush? Do the 5-year over the 4-year. That's what I always tell my Northwestern students. Yeah. Northeastern. Right. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Hey, those are fighting words there.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I messed up pretty badly there.
So, but once I got to law school, I had seen the value of it, and I crafted my own co-op in some ways, right? So my first year of law school out in California, when I came back to Boston for the summer, I worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in white collar crime division.
Oh, nice.
And got to see a lot of litigation. And I went to law school, primarily because I thought I wanted to be a litigator. Right?
Sure.
And so I had that opportunity to be around the courtroom and really take some really interesting experiences in the federal prosecutor's office, which is what the U.S. Attorney's Office is. And then I went back to school in the fall, and I saw an opportunity to, instead of taking classes in my second semester of my second year, and law school is a 3-year program, in the second semester of my second year of law school, there was an opportunity to apply for it's like a federal clerkship, except it's for law students. It's called a externship. And I ended up working for a federal judge in downtown Los Angeles for the spring semester of my second year. And that was a great experience, not because it solidified the fact that I wanted to be a litigator, because it absolutely confirmed that I wanted nothing to do with litigation.
There you go. No, people don't understand how important that is. That's one thing I love about co-ops, and internships can do this as well. These co-ops are a little more extensive than internships because normally it's a full-time endeavor that you're exclusively dedicating yourself to. Or internships, they can be full-time over the summer, but a lot of times you're fitting them in around coursework, and but they still can serve the same purpose. Right. Experiential education is you can come away learning what you don't like.
Right.
Boy, you can save yourself, from going down a path where you could either hate your job for a decade or 15 or 20 years, or find yourself going back to school in the 30s because you just aren't doing what you want to do.
Right. And so the interesting thing about that externship, it was a full-time externship, and I had to write basically some paper on top of it to get my credits for the semester. But Mark, you and the audience are going to love this. USC still managed to charge me tuition for that whole semester.
Yeah. Well, I know that because right now my daughter, she's getting her master's in clinical mental health counseling from a really strong program at NC State, but she has a pretty full caseload, and she's paying them to work for free. I mean, the only good news is it's May is going to be here soon, and then she starts getting paid, and it's just a process.
Right,
I mean, every single person in the program and the cohort before got placed in private practice, so at least it's got 100% placement. But hey, how did this work out where you're doing the work and instead of getting paid, you're still paying?
It's quite a racket, right? But one quick thing about law school, and it applies to undergrad too. One of my professors, again, because I had great relationships with folks. Oh, and this one professor asked me to take one of my co-ops and go to UC Berkeley to work for a professor there doing deep research. And her thesis to me was, I would be happier going to get a PhD than I would be to go into law school.
Oh, wow.
And so I went to her to her alma mater and
so did you live in the Berkeley area from that, or did you do that?
I did,
commute?
yeah, right on campus. Right on campus.
What a great
UC
experience.
Berkeley. That was a ton of fun. It was super interesting. And to be quite frank, I was maybe too pragmatic for my own good. And I said, I'm like, this is a great experience, and I love a lot of this. But I'm going to have to take care of some family here as I get older. Like there are some practicalities around, going to law school and being able to, to reset, our family in some ways. And so, but that was a great experience. And that was, so you can imagine some blue collar kid going to some school that, at the time people, confused with Northwestern all the time, right?
Sure.
It wasn't the brand name.
It wasn't just
today.
me.
At law school, I would get that all the time. Oh, you went to Northwestern? And like, that was my joke with my buddies from Northeastern. I was like, sometimes I just get tired of correcting it, right? But imagine you're a law school admissions person and you see this resume come through, right? GPA, LSAT, sure, fine, check. You've hit our markers. What's this? Right? You see Berkeley working in a kind of a pre-PhD program, White House, all of these interesting kind of esoteric government, departments, and Boston City Council, and even a law firm. Wow, this is pretty unique. So I think the whole process served me really well. And so, after I worked for the federal judge, I thought, this is really kind of, and I tease all the litigators that I work with now. I'm like, you guys just argue about everything, right? Like, that's all you do. That's your job. But, at that point, it was a really kind of important point for me. And it was based out of these co-ops and co-op-like experiences that I had, which was, I want to feel like I'm building something.
Sure.
Right. And so that was the start of me eventually ending up at a law firm doing deals, right? Doing corporate work. And so I work with private equity and venture capital managers now in raising their funds. And it feels like a collaborative kind of, positive experience, right?
Right.
So I tease with my litigator friends around the fact that, all you guys do is fight about stuff. And then, they'll say back to me, it's like, well, as a corporate lawyer that drafts the deal documents, we're only fighting about what you guys wrote. Right. But, what I do today is I'm on the corporate side. So I do, what's kind of referred to as deal work. And more specifically for me, is I work with venture capital and private equity firms with respect to their fundraising for their funds. So VC firm gets money in from college endowments, right? From pension programs, from from a number of pockets of money. And then they'll put that money to work with startups, with, VC opportunities and the like. So, and that was all kind of, informed by co-op in one way, right? Like that this co-op string runs a lot further than just Northeastern, right? I kind of made it work as a co-op type experience more so at USC Law School. And then when I got to my first corporate law firm job, I went to a law firm in Boston that offered me the opportunity to work across a multiple array of corporate experiences over
Oh,
the first
wow.
4 or 5 years.
So you brought in your resume there.
Right. And so I could see what these things, because I didn't know what an IPO was, Mark,
Sure.
until I
Sure.
worked on one. I didn't know what doing a public to public company merger was until I worked on one. And how could I possibly decide what I wanted to do when I grew up if I hadn't done it a little bit or been around it a little bit? And so I kind of think of USC as my own special kind of co-op experience. I think of my first law firm experience as a little bit of a special experience. And it was there at that law firm that I got first exposed to the fund formation work, which is what I do. And I said, okay, I want to do this. Right.
Wow.
And so, it's co-op as a way of life.
Yeah, no, it looks like Northeast. Your experience at the Northeastern taught you the value of experiential education, as Dr. Martha Saunders calls it, high impact experiences.
Yes.
Having these high impact experiences that you learned so much from experiential learning and help discern what is it I like, what do I don't like, and how can I take my knowledge of myself and what I've learned and position myself so that I'm doing something that I actually enjoy.
Right.
That's pretty invaluable because most people don't get that opportunity. They just commit to a job, and then if they don't like it, they're kind of stuck for a while.
What my wife Mary and I tell our kids is go experience a whole bunch of different things, and that'll help you decide. And it's okay to do something and say that's not for me. That's a valuable moment for you too.
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed this interview about pros and cons of a cooperative education. And we just started talking about criticisms, negatives of co-op. We're going to continue and pick that up in part 2. So we hope you'll come back next Thursday and join us as I discuss with Gus 4 to 5 negatives that we do here about co-op, as well as many other positives that Gus will get into.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed the first part of Sylvia Borgo's spotlight on the Semester at Sea Study Abroad program. If you missed part 1, I encourage you to go back to it. Hope you'll enjoy the final part 2.
So is there a time of the year, like it starts in May or June or different times? It goes to one place and then there's multiple times people can start it?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. So they have 2 voyages a year, 2 main voyages a year. And I believe for the time being, that's all that's being offered. There used to be like a summer session. But at this time, the voyages are the spring, which really begins January 2nd or 3rd. Embarkation starts and ends in April. So like mid-April. So that would be the spring voyage. And then there's the fall voyage, which begins in September and ends right before the winter holidays. So like around the 20th and 21st, it ends. So those are the 2 main voyages. And actually, I'm glad that you asked this. If a student is so super excited about this program and is considering it either for a gap year or during their college years or even post-grad, because even students who have graduated college can go ahead and enroll the year after they graduate. You can't be 27. You couldn't have graduated, college like 4 years ago and come back as a student, but like you have 1 year upon your graduation to still be considered a student. Those students could start thinking ahead, probably giving themselves about 12, maybe even 18 months of a leeway to start thinking about it, simply because of passport and visa requirements. Sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to chase down those visas, and maybe even make arrangements to visit embassy offices and consulates and so forth. So thinking at least 1 year ahead is probably wise.
And what do you see as pros and cons, or, when people are weighing the advantages or disadvantages of semester at sea?
Yes, absolutely. So as you can tell, I love this program so much. So I'm going to start off with the pros. First of all, and you've talked about this, Mark, about how you've had many employers and families that you worked with who hire for their companies. They really appreciate students who have a global experience. And really, I believe that the global experience, and this is just my opinion, but it's not just the fact that you had an opportunity to visit a lot of countries and maybe navigate those cultural and transportation and social dynamics, but it's, I think, like you've also mentioned, the willingness to do something that's a little bit challenging and a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit stressful, and how that stretches you as a person and how that helps you grow. So it's the global experience. It's that flexibility that comes with this kind of travel and the demands. So I believe that that's a huge pro. Then another pro, in my opinion, but it could also be considered a con, is that there's very limited internet. When you're out at sea, the internet service is incredibly limited. But the reason I consider that a pro, and really the majority of students that I know have spoken, that it is a pro to have limited internet, because that allows you to unplug, that allows you to connect more face-to-face with students. It allows you to pick up new hobbies, or go back and check in with former hobbies and passions, like playing the guitar. You can't travel with a cello. That would be difficult, or with, like an oboe. That would be a little difficult. But kids often bring guitars or ukuleles on board, or they crochet or knit. But really, it's really that opportunity to check in with other people your age or others face to face, and have a lot of that unplugged time that I think is incredibly valuable. But of course, I understand that some might consider that a con.
Is there an application process, and is it competitive? Like, what's it like for someone to get into the program? I understood you need to be looking 12 to 18 months ahead of time for all the visa and passport and issues like that. But what's the application process like?
Yes. So good news. Perhaps this is the only time I will say it's 100% admission rate. You are 100% admitted if you apply. And the application process, you can visit the website. It's semesteratc.org, and find out all that information. But of course, I do advise students and families looking into this to coordinate with the home institution, the home college and university first. But the application is super easy. It's online, and the process that they walk you through to make sure that you have all of your documentation and the information that they give you on how to proceed with passports and visas and health checks is very robust once your application has gone through. At this point, I should mention the cost. It is currently, for the spring 2024 and the fall 2024 voyage, it's $31,650 for the semester, but that includes the tuition, which of course will give you that college credit for the courses you take, provided that you've established that is okay with your home institution. It also includes room and board. So a room you could share with one person, you could share with two people. There's different accommodations. You could have an outside cabin, which will allow you to have maybe a window, maybe a balcony, depending there. You could have an indoor cabin, which would be a little bit cheaper. So room and board, tuition, and like I mentioned, those 3 faculty-led guided field classes in 3 different ports. That's what's included. What's not included is your own expenditure. So if you arrive at a port and you wanted to go catch a show or do some of your own traveling, that's what's not covered. And of course, any meals and entertainment that happen outside on your own, that's not covered as well. Let me mention a little bit some other ways you can spend your money that is not covered by the program. The ship is absolutely gorgeous. It has a movie theater, which also doubles as a classroom during the day. It has a spa. You could get massages. You could get your hair done at the salon. You could get a haircut. You could get your nails done. It has a student store, very small, but you could buy your merch there, your stickers, your water bottles, your sunscreen. It also has 2 dining halls, 2 dining rooms. It has that main auditorium that holds about 600 or so attendees. It has a library. It has a small gym. And then it also has, but this is only for faculty and staff, not for any students. It also has a small bar that it's called the Chappie. And except for the bar, I believe all of those, except for the bar and the gym, the library, the theater, the dining halls, they all double up as classrooms during the day. And then during lunch hours, and of course in the evenings, they double up as to eat or entertainment or for special events.
And could a student take like a full 15 credit load? Is there enough courses to do that, to sort of replace a traditional full-time student load, or is it more like less than that?
Yes, that's a great question. Typically, students tend to take 3 courses. So I believe that's more like 12 units. Some students have taken 4. I've known some students have taken 4 courses, but that can be quite challenging. As you can imagine, you only have 50 days with your professor and you're crunching. And so that can be a bit of a challenge for a lot of students. I don't believe I've ever heard a student take 5 courses. So 3 is the average. 4 is probably allowed.
Is there any financial aid at all, or is it sort of, hey, you need the 31,000, or you can't do it?
Yes. Oh, thank you for mentioning this. This is what I'm so super excited about. Coming up, there are plans right now in the work where in the very near future, through fundraising and other endeavors, the Semester at Sea program, which is managed by ISE. And by the way, I apologize. I'm blanking out on what IEC stands right now. I think it's the International Shipboard. Oh, I cannot remember.
Can't help you on that one, Sylvia.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to look it up right after I get off the call with you. But yes, right now efforts are underway to make sure that in the future, any student who wants to sail and take this opportunity will be funded fully. Will have their need fully met. Currently, the students that travel, there are scholarships available. There's also work study available. You can work on the ship. Some students do tech help. Some students work at the student store. Some students work at the field office, so they help coordinate those programs. Some students do social media marketing with the program. So there is work study available. And every semester, they also have Gates scholars who have their tuition completely covered. However, that I believe is a separate scholarship application that is not necessarily, unless I'm mistaken, affiliated with Semester at Sea. They just honor those Gates scholars. But there are scholarships available. And like I mentioned, in the near future, they're hoping to fund completely any student who wants to sail and has that need.
Do you see this as something that would be a good family trip if a family wanted to do it?
Fabulous question. Yes, and 100% yes. It would be, in my opinion, the easiest way to travel, right? You don't have to worry about packing and repacking every couple of weeks. So you always come back to your home base, your ship and your rooms. But the fact that you have meals covered as well as a family, and really the meal selection is quite good. They have vegan options, vegetarian options, gluten-free options. They have, all of their meals are labeled to meet any dietary need. Or if they're not, you can certainly work with the chef to make sure that is addressed. But yes, families of all ages can certainly travel, and because of this incredible community, welcoming community where everybody interacts, regardless of your age or experience, it would be fantastic. Actually, if I may say, the only other con that I might mention is, aside from that possible limited internet con, is the fact that it can be a pretty intense environment. Imagine living with the same 500 people for 100 days, and that includes your family. So it can be a bit of an intense environment. But remember, it's only 100 days with that break of having classes and the field experiences and the travel opportunities in the country. So that brings, I think, enough diverse experiences you won't get cabin fever.
Do you think there's like a bonding element where like friendships get formed by sort of having this shared experience for the 100 days?
Yes, 100%. I think these are lifelong friendships. If you can imagine, I feel, I can't speak for every student, of course, but I've gathered that the students are very globally minded. They're very adventurous. They're very curious. And so I think being around that community, I think also speaks to these friendships that are going to last for years and years and years. As a matter of fact, on the website, they have a little stat that says that 97% of semester at sea alums say it is their most significant college experience. 97% of the alums. Yeah, that's huge. And stories have gone, many students tell the story of, well, my mom sailed on semester at sea, 30 years ago. So she wanted me to do semester at sea, or my parents met on semester at sea. And here I am now, or my grandparents and parents went to semester at sea. And that's why I'm here. So it really is not only that connection that you form with that community, because every voyage is different, but also that intergenerational almost legacy of wanting your students to continue to do semester at sea. I mean, I would love for my students to do this with my own children when they're in college.
This has really been awesome. You've answered all my questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that you haven't shared?
No, absolutely. I'm glad that you gave me this opportunity to talk about this really fabulous program. Oh, one more thing, actually. Yes. There is this fabulous website, and I hope you're not haven't mentioned this before in one of your college resources, but it's called the College Tour. I think it's thecollegetour.com. And they have a webpage that features lots and lots of colleges and universities. But they just, on March 29th, so about a month ago, they just launched a 30-minute segment. I think it's like 35-minute segment on semester at sea. So you can see kind of the inside of the show and hear from the students. I think they have 5 or 6 students and a lifelong learner about their experiences and why they chose it as their study abroad experience.
I don't think we have mentioned that. Is that have all kinds of other tours on there as well?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. They have colleges like UC Davis or Arizona State. They even have community colleges there. They have a handful of community colleges. So the collegetour.com. I really love that site.
Well, guess what? That's going to be our recommended resource for this week. You saved me having to find one.
That sounds great. I'm glad I could help.
Sylvia, this was awesome. I really think our listeners are going to be excited about this. It's obviously not for everyone, but there's a person out there that's really adventuresome, loves to travel, has the resources to be able to make this work, and hasn't heard about this. And so I'm really thankful for you taking the time to do this. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Mark.
Friends, on Monday's episode, I will finally get to sharing my thoughts with you about early action. And then we'll continue my interview with David Marcus, author of the book Acceptance, in part 2 of 3. And friends, remember, it's not where you go, it's not where you go, it's not where you go to college, but it's what you do when you get to college, and it's what you do when you get out of college. That is what will determine your career trajectory. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from and Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.